My name's Kurt. If I haven't had a chance to say hello to you, glad you are with us today. You're joining us for a sermon series called Apprentices of Jesus, and this started last week. And what we have been doing is really looking at what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? What is Jesus inviting us to do? Whoa, did I hear something? Did I squeak? I did. How are we doing? All right, good. Okay. I was like, did I create that noise out of my vocal? Yeah, anyway. Okay, so weird. So that's kind of what we're doing. We're looking at what does it mean to follow Jesus. And the word apprentice is really just a word that means someone who comes alongside a teacher and is guided by them, is sort of an immersive experience. It's a word that often in spiritual formation literature kind of stands in alongside disciples. So if you hear apprentice and you grew up in the church, disciple, another good word for that as well. And last week, we really started talking about rival allegiances. We started to say that when someone decided to become a follower of Jesus in the first century world, it was a big deal, and there was a lot to say no to say yes to Jesus and in that journey. We also kind of highlighted a problem, and the problem is it's easy for us as followers of Jesus 2,000 years or so after his resurrection to find ourselves in a place where we talk about Jesus, we are interested in Jesus, we have ideas about God, we love God sincerely, but it's easy for us to live in the land of ideas and forget that actually Christianity is a practice. It is a way. It is a pattern for life that goes beyond just what we think. It's what we think compels us to live a particular way. And so I want to start with a quote from a book that sort of inspired the structure of our series that we're in. This is from John Mark Comer. This is what he writes. He says this in Practicing the Way. He says, if an apprentice is simply anyone whose ultimate aim is to be with Jesus in order to become like him and to live the way Jesus would live if he were in their shoes, then a non-apprentice is simply anyone whose ultimate aim in life is anything else. The problem is, in the West, we have created a cultural milieu where you can be a Christian but not an apprentice of Jesus. You can have the right ideas about God, you can believe the right stuff, you can affirm the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, our denominational theology statement, all of that stuff. You can affirm all of that, but the idea of actually being a follower, being someone who is activated in life beyond just what we think, that's hard. And the truth is, we probably have ebbs and flows. All of us probably have ebbs and flows in that, and that's understandable. I would say I experience that sometimes. Sometimes it's, I have a lot of ideas about God, but it feels kind of dry on the ground. And other times it's like, whoa, there's something significant happening here. And this quote goes on, and I think it's helpful. He continues and he says, tragically, this has created a two-tier church where a large swath of people who believe in God and even regularly attend church have not re-architectured their daily lives on the foundation of apprenticeship to Jesus. This is an alien idea in the writings of the New Testament. See, New Testament Christianity was not primarily an ideology. It was primarily a commitment of allegiance to Jesus that transformed how you live your life, how you order your days, what you prioritize, all of these sorts of things. And the big idea here, I think, is summarized in Luke chapter 9. Jesus says it this way. He says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me. That is a tall order. That is not easy. And so, as we continue this series, I want you to know that we're holding all of this tension with a lot of grace. A lot of not just sitting here saying, am I a disciple? Am I not a disciple? Am I an apprentice? Am I not? We'd rather just simply say, what's that next step to be more of a follower of Jesus than I happen to be right now? What's that healthy next step that maybe there's rival allegiances in my life, like we talked about last week, and those rival allegiances are taking away my ability to sort of dive further into this thing. Okay, there might be something that grows out of that. As we said last week, the series idea kind of captures this, and then we're going to jump into our idea for today. The series idea is just simply Apprentices of Jesus renounce rival allegiances and reorder life in order to be with him, become like him, and to do what he did. And so today we're going to break down this idea. What might the invitation to be with Jesus look like for you and me? And here's an idea that I want to really live in today. It's this: in all of life, there's nothing better than being with Jesus. And all that we do, and all that we are, and everything we have the opportunity to be a part of, there's nothing, if we believe the witness of the New Testament and the experience of God's people throughout the ages, there is literally nothing better than being in the presence and experiencing Jesus in whatever unique way that you are wired to experience him in. I have to be honest with you this morning. As much as I agree with that and experience that, there are days where I forget about that. As much as that's true. Like you all, like, through giving, offering, and all of that, right? Like, you pay me to do that. You know, like, it's like my job to be spiritual. No. Actually, it's my invitation as a person to be spiritual, to be connected to God, right? And the truth of the matter is that as much as I'm in love and just all in on Jesus day, it might be Monday, and I just am zoned out of that. And I'm not doing anything active to sin. I'm not doing anything crazy. But there's this sense that on Tuesday, the next day, and I'm just like, whoa, Jesus, I'm noticing you. I'm aware of you. You're here. Wow, how come I wasn't tapped into this? It's an ongoing struggle for anyone, wherever they happen to be in the journey, and it's okay. But I want to say with all of my heart and mind, I believe this to be true, that there isn't anything better that you could do with your life than cultivate a relationship with Jesus that is raw, that is real, that is vulnerable, where you can actually tell Jesus stuff that you probably would struggle to tell anyone else, and you feel safe to do that. You ask questions in moments of stress. You pause for a second and you say, Jesus, what am I invited to do in this moment? Like this is the greatest way to experience life. But it is hard. And so why is it hard? We talked about this a bit last week. I'm not going to live here long, but it's hard because when we try to change, we either pattern our lives in ways where we kind of open the windows for God's light to come in, or we don't, and that's hard. It's about the things we think, the ideas we have. We sometimes call it teaching and liturgy, like the words and beliefs that we have are huge. And it's the people we surround ourselves with consistently. Are they followers of Jesus? Are they in on this? Are they encouraging me? Are they calling me out? And it's those things we do to pause, to pray, to contemplate. Some of you in one groups are having moments of quiet right now and solitude. These are all the kinds of things that help us grow. And so I want to really live in this theme a little bit of what it means to be with Jesus. And one verse, very just kind of simple kind of moment, is when Jesus calls the disciples in Mark, when he calls all of them. So he's individually called a few, but here he's going to say, here's my 12. And this is in Mark chapter 3, verse 13 through 15. It says this. It says, Jesus went on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. So they're on a mountainside, there's a gathering, and he says, hey, there's a few of you I need to have a second meeting with. Come here, let's talk this out. And he appointed 12. that they might be with him. I love how this is phrased, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. I love this sort of mapping of be with him, go out for him. Be with him, go out for him. And of course we know that in Mark chapter 3, Jesus is there in the flesh. And so as they go out, it's different than for us, right? Because today, being with Jesus, on the one hand, we could say, man, if he was physically here sometimes, that would be really helpful. But on the other hand, you and I have something those disciples didn't have in the same kind of way. We have the Spirit of Jesus that goes with us anywhere, everywhere, all the time. And so even when you and I are sent into the world to live our life, to do whatever God has called us to do, God, through his Spirit, is there with us. And so here's what I want us to talk about. I want us to talk about like this idea of these disciples and other followers of Jesus in the New Testament who, when they were called to follow him, they had to change how they lived. They had to reorder their lives. They had to negotiate with their upbringing and their culture and all of the things around them and their vocation. And all of those things had to be reorganized, rethought in light of him. And what you don't get very often in the New Testament is a bunch of people saying, oh, bummer. I can't believe I reorganized my life around the way of Jesus. You just don't get that. What you actually get is people who are so reorganized around Jesus that they're willing to suffer and die around his cause. And so here's a thought to just kind of set us up, and we're going to jump into our main passage here in a moment. It's this: being with Jesus involves a reordering of life. It involves reordering how we do what we do. Now, some of you, when we talk about things like spiritual formation or spiritual practices, the reordering or the ordering, that's just your jam. You know what I mean? Like you're just like always organized. Your checklists have checklists that have checklists. You're like the most annoying person ever, you know? No, but you know what I mean, right? Like you're like, oh, you mean I get to structure my life? I get to like build a plan and just do it. And I get to wake up at like 4:30 in the morning. I'm on the elliptical, but I'm listening to the Bible. And then I'm drinking my first cup of coffee and the children come in and they see how pleasant I am at 5:30 or 6, right? And then if that's your gift, go all in, please. Like, tell us all about it. I love it. I really do. I'm not trying to mess with you if that's your gift. But then there's some of you who are like me. You're just kind of a little more sloppy, okay? And so this idea of reordering your life, it feels daunting and it feels confusing. And it's like, well, I can reorder this, but then that. And then, if you're like me, you find something else might be true. That a little structure actually does you some good. That a little structure that might in some ways feel limiting is actually the pathway to your freedom and liberation in life because it sets you up for a win. It sets you up to be with Jesus and to be present to the people around you, right? And so we're all coming at this differently. I come at this with pure vulnerability and pure honesty. I am not the guy if you want me to be going through the Bible in a year. I'm just not that guy. Some of you are, and I think it's lovely, and I think you should do that. I think it's awesome. But you give me a Bible plan, Bible in a year, man, I'm reading my psalm. I'm like pumped on it for the week 1 and 2. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution, right? Like I'm all in. But by week 3, I'm like sort of speed reading. And by week 4, I'm like, oh, wow, this thing in, the Gospel of Matthew, this is really interesting, and I want to just sit there for a long time. And by week 5, I forgot I even made the commitment, So it's true, like we're all coming at this differently. But there is something beautiful about reorienting, reorganizing, reordering our lives after Jesus. And I want to tell you this, that it's regular, normal life. If I can give you anything that's kind of a sub-point today, really, it's that following Jesus happens in regular, mundane, ups and downs, Monday through Sunday, ordinary life. And so what I want to do for the next few minutes is I want to kind of give you an example of this, because it's easy for us to read passages in the New Testament and to glorify the characters, right? Like we read stories about these people from the first century church, and it's like, oh man, that's then, and that's spiritual, and things happened over there, but it's so different. It feels disconnected from real life. And so I want to show you a passage. We're going to actually spend a little bit more time today in the book of Acts. We're going to extend a story here in Acts to kind of help us see more of this about being with Jesus. In Acts 18, Paul is on a journey. Paul is this radical hater of Christians. He becomes someone who is all in on the way of Jesus. He suffers for it. At this point, he's already suffered multiple times. He's been beaten up. He's been put in jail at multiple moments. You know, he has had a rough go. And he finds himself in the ancient city of Corinth. Corinth is next to a waterway. It is a place of trade. It is diverse. It has more like pagan temples than you can even count. It has just all kinds of things that you would just think are dark and bad as well. It is like a metropolis in the first century. And so Paul ends up going there. It says this in Acts 18:1. It says, after this, the things in the prior chapter, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus. He had recently came from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. This is really important. We're going to nerd out here in a few minutes. And one of the things I want you to notice is that this note in Acts is historically on the money. There is evidence that when Claudius was emperor in Rome, the people there got so upset with the folks that were there that were Jewish that all of them were cast out and banned from the city. Some think this was thousands, some think this might have been hundreds of thousands. It's just a lot of people. And as this happens, you have someone named Priscilla and another person named Aquila who were part of this diaspora, and they happen to meet Paul in the city of Corinth. So Paul's already been beat up a lot, and the ruling under Claudius has been anti-Jewish, and Paul is a Christian, but he's also obviously a Jewish person, and so this is a troubling season. It says that Paul visited with them. Because they practiced the same trade, he stayed and worked with them. They all worked with leather, or were tent makers, you may have heard. And so notice here, Paul isn't just in some monastery in the middle of Corinth where he prays day and night and night and day. No, I'm just kidding. We're just saying that. I mean, that's in heaven. That's great. But like he is like living out the reality of that worship by making tents. You following? So he's doing normal stuff. He's not like an ordained minister that spends their whole time studying the Bible. You know, he is working. He has a vocation. He is all in on the place where he is. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to think, like, what are the conversations happening in the marketplace? Like, what is his experience like? I'm going to show you the market area where he may have had a shop, actually. It's been excavated. You see each of those cubbies would represent, on the screen there, a different trade, a different place in the market. And so Aquila, Priscilla, and Paul likely would have had a cubby or part of one of those like cubby areas where they would do their work and they would get paid for it. And they would live amongst all the people, not just Jewish people or Christian people, but all the people. And they would have to figure out what it meant to be a passionate follower of Jesus in that kind of environment. And so, it gets, very interesting because, of course, we have evidence that the next slide here is the head of Julius Caesar. and an inscription that says the divine Julius Caesar from what we believe is one of the temples that would have been a place where all the time you would have the worship of the emperors as deities. And so you have all of this, like this is the world they're living in, and they're just doing their job. And they're daily working with people that are way different than them, don't look like them, don't act like them. Paul and his two friends probably have strong accents, and here they are just trying to follow Jesus in an environment that is not set up as Jesus-y, if you make any sense out of that. And so we keep going, again, this idea of like normal life, normal places. This isn't just some spiritual monastery that Paul goes and prays in. This is normal. We keep going. Verse 4. It says, every Sabbath, Paul interacted with people in the synagogue, trying to convince both Jews and Greeks. Once Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself fully to the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. So there is a point where Paul says, I got to go all in on this. I need to just make sure that I have proclaimed the idea that the Messiah has risen from the dead and we all can gather our lives around him. When they opposed and slandered him, Paul, he shook the dust from his clothes in protest and said to them, you are responsible for your own fates. I'm innocent. From now on, I'll go to the Gentiles. And so Paul, at this moment, this isn't like universally, like on his next journey, but in Corinth, he says, okay, if you don't want to like be open to this, I don't have to spend all my time here. I'll go talk to people who are more interested. And so it's fascinating. Again, this is just like normal life. He's going to the synagogue to have conversation because he's a Jewish person. That's normal for him. We actually have evidence, again, of the Jewish synagogue community in the first century. Here we have some sort of stone kind of pillar topper kind of thing where there might have been a small synagogue. And of course, there's an inscription in a similar area that was found that just simply says the gathering place of the Hebrews. And so this is a normal, everyday kind of situation. Paul goes in and is trying to persuade them. But he finally just sort of says, okay, we're going to take a break from that. And it says in verse 7, he left the synagogue and went next door to the home of Titius Justus, a Gentile God worshiper. Crispus, this is cool, Crispus, the synagogue leader, so a Jewish person, the synagogue leader, and his entire household came to believe in the Lord. So not all was lost. There was someone who said, yeah, this feels right. This is good. And it says many Corinthians believed and were baptized after listening to Paul. At this point, we need to understand that Paul has been through a lot of traumatic events already in his life. He's haunted probably by his past life where he was hurting people he now loves. And on top of that, every time he is doing something good, it's like he hits resistance. And often that leads to being beat up. Often that has led to imprisonment. I mean, the guy has gone through tons of traumatic experiences in a very short window of time. And so you can understand, like when he's met with opposition in the synagogue, he's kind of finally just say, man, I've been here, done that, you know? I'm exhausted. Like, do what you want. But there is some good fruit. There are some good things happening. And as he sits in that tension of this is usually hard and it usually goes bad for me because enough people are going to not like me and then I'm going to get beat up and it's terrible. But people are coming to the Lord and faith and goodness and all the stuff you hope is happening. Paul has an experience with Jesus in the midst of all of that. And the next verse says this. One night the Lord said to Paul in a vision, don't be afraid. Continue speaking. Don't be silent. And I love this. I am with you, and no one who attacks you will harm you, for I have many people in this city. Have you ever been walking through something and you're trying to follow Jesus, and maybe things are just really like just coming to a head, and it feels like overwhelming. You don't know what the next move is. You've had some pain and some sorrow and whatever it might be just layering itself on you. And then in some even small but powerful way, you sense that Jesus still sees you in all of your mess. That Jesus still sees you in all of your pain. That Jesus still sees you in all of the stuff in front of you. And whatever that might have been like for you, whether it was kind of a charismatic experience like this for Paul, or just this washing over yourself with a sense of God's peace and love and concern for you that set you in a different direction, a new kind of openness. Those moments change things. They change everything at times. They're the moments that when you're having bad and hard moments where it's like, I don't know if I even believe in God. You go back to those situations and say, wait, but God did this, and it wasn't just my brain making it up. It was real, you know? Paul has one of those experiences here, where daily he is clearly walking with Jesus and doing what he can to notice Jesus and to be with Jesus and talk about Jesus and all the stuff. But I know that there are moments when someone just needs a little extra special touch from God, and when that's possible and when that happens, it sets you up to trust that you can take the next step boldly. That in all of life, like there's nothing better than being with Jesus, and what we need oftentimes is to just be aware that sometimes it feels like he's really far away, but he might actually be with us and have something for us just when we need it the most. Well, this pivotal moment of being with Jesus sets Paul up to be able to stay in the same place, do the same kind of work, do the same kind of ministry for like a year and a half. And towards the end of his time there, he's going to have a bit of a trial. He's going to be sort of tested against what Jesus said to him about you're not going to be harmed. It's going to be okay. And this happens in the next section of the same chapter. In verse 12, it says, now when Gallio was the governor of the province of Achaia, which is where Corinth is, the Jews united in their opposition against Paul and brought him before the court. Now, Paul, you can imagine, is thinking to himself, oh, I've seen this one before. This is where they get the sticks out and start whipping me, you know? Like, you can imagine that first instinct. It's like, dude, I know this story. I've got the scars to show it. But Jesus had said, you're not going to be harmed. You're going to actually thrive in this place, and I'm going to do something powerful and important through you. Now, the Jewish people say this. They say, this man is persuading others to worship God unlawfully, they declared. Unlawfully. Now, when you read that, if you've been in church for most of your life and you hear the word law, you think of what? What books of the Bible are you thinking of when you hear the law? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? You're thinking of the Torah, the Old Testament commandments, right? In context, that's not this. In context, what's happening here is Gallio is being approached by these Jewish people, and they're saying the way that Paul is worshiping and telling other people to worship is actually against Roman law. Let me explain. If you've been around here, you may have heard this before, but remember that in the first century, since the time of Augustus at least, when the Jewish people were conquered in their homeland, they were given special protections, which included the idea that they did not have to worship foreign gods, and that as Jewish people, they could worship God in their own way, and the only sort of like thing they had to do to appease the emperor was to worship God but pray to God for the emperor on their behalf. Does that make sense? In other words, we'll pray for you, emperor, as long as you let us worship how we want to worship. It's how that arrangement works out. Now, you can understand when you have a movement of people that has non-Jewish people joining and kind of they look Jewish when it comes to what they do together. They are, like a lot of them are actually ethnically Jewish. But what do you do when all of a sudden it's like, but are some of these people actually Jewish? Because we know the men aren't having a particular religious surgical procedure when they become followers of Messiah Jesus. Are you following? Yeah, who wants to do that when you're grown up, right? Like, come on. A couple people do in the Bible, and it's like a big deal. But like that's a huge deal. So these Jewish folks throughout the Mediterranean begin to be worried that if we don't stop these Christians, our rights are going to be tampered with because Rome's going to accuse us of saying anyone can be Jewish. It's just fine. It's no big deal. And that's a huge risk for the Jewish community. And so that's what a lot of the uproar is around this. And so they say this man is persuading others to worship God unlawfully in the context of Roman law. This is on the ground, just regular stuff. People are mad. You might even say there is a radical polarization in the political landscape of ancient Judaism. Christians? Legalists? It's just crazy. And what do we do with that? When our day and age, we just, say mean things on the internet. But in that day, they went to the court and they said, you got to take care of this. And so Paul is now in the situation and he's going to be tested. Am I really going to be safe here? And I have a strong sense that he believed that he would be. And so it says, just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, if there had been some sort of injury or criminal behavior, I would have reason to accept your complaint. Let's stop there for a moment. I want to show you a couple of things here. The next stone here. This is an inscription. It's a segment of a Gallio inscription. In other words, we know Gallio was a real person. In fact, from history, we know when he reigned. It was a very short time where he was the proconsul of Achaia. And it's fascinating because if you kind of think this through, so we know a couple of other historical facts. We know that the Jewish people have been kicked out by Claudius, right? Remember that from a minute ago. We know that when Claudius is done and Nero takes the throne in 54 AD, that the Jewish people will be reinstated in Rome and allowed to come back. We know that Gallio was around about 51 to 52 AD. And so basically what we deduce from this is like a kind of a pin. When we try and figure out like when New Testament events happened, this passage is actually one of the sort of like central pins on the kind of timeline board you're trying to create. And we know that Paul would have been in Corinth from something like 49 to 51-ish AD. You following? Why do we know that? Because the New Testament went out of its way to give us normal, everyday details about normal, everyday life that Paul was experiencing. Again, he didn't live on a hill somewhere. He was on the ground living with Jesus. In fact, here's a timeline. This is fun just because, right? So that helps us, by the way, know that 1 Corinthians would be written slightly after Paul leaves, right? And of course, unfortunately, there's a lot of problems that come out of this church. It's like he leaves, and it's like, hey, I think this is good. I think I can leave now. And then he's gone for a little bit, and everyone's just doing all kinds of terrible things, right? So that's sad. But that sort of gives you the chronology here. Again, one more fun thing. This is the bema. This is the court. This is where Paul would have been. We have that excavated, where a seat of judgment would have been, where he would have had to face trial in the situation. And so Paul is living normal life, and all of this is happening. And Jesus is with him. I want to end the story and just kind of tie it up here for a minute. says in verse 15, however, since these are squabbles, this is Gallio talking, since these are squabbles about a message, names, and your own law, deal with them yourselves. So he says, this isn't about my law. This is about your own law. Like, I don't care. He doesn't want to deal with it. I have no desire to sit in judgment over such things. He expelled them from the court, but everyone seized Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and gave him a beating in the presence of the governor. None of this mattered to Gallio. I mean, this is crazy, crazy stuff. What I want you to see as we look at this example from Paul's life is something I've kind of said quite a bit, but I want us to just really hone into this as we sort of move towards a close. It's this: being with Jesus happens in normal life and in normal places. This isn't some sort of magical land called the New Testament where people just we're great at being Christians. The New Testament is raw, it's messy, it's complicated. It shows just how hard and how much sacrifice, this idea of reorienting your life around Jesus so that you learn more and more how it is to be with Jesus. This is hard, hard stuff. But as we sit with that, I always come back to something Jesus himself says, and it's this. In Matthew 11, Jesus once said this: "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke, my way of life, my teaching is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." The vision that Paul got feels a lot like this to me. I'm with you. You're going to be okay. Stay. Keep going. Jesus invites his followers to be with him, to bring all of our stuff to him, to bring our burdens to him, to bring our struggles to him, to notice that when we do that, that there's something light and freeing and liberating about what normal actually is. Because at the end of the day, Jesus just wants to spend time with you. Jesus wants to be with you. Jesus wants to know you. He wants you to know him. This is why he died for you, right? He wants you to be with him in whatever way that you possibly can, whatever that looks like for you. And as we wrap up, here's some challenges that came to mind. There's other challenges, of course, and that's fine. But, I think sometimes some of us struggle with over-intellectualizing Jesus. That we think about him a lot, we talk about him, we have theories about him. This is something I struggle with at times, right? So we stay in the theory, but we struggle with the whole life practice of the way of Jesus. Or we talk about Jesus very similarly, right? We talk about Jesus, but maybe sometimes it's not as often with Jesus. Or we over-spiritualize. We make all of life so spiritual that we impose ideas or ideologies or situations on Jesus that maybe aren't his. That maybe we're just kind of putting stuff on him. Compartmentalize. We experience Jesus' presence in hyped up moments. We have those moments where our adrenaline gets up, or our experience or our senses are up, and maybe that's the only way we feel that we experience him. And so we have this mountaintop high, and then we live a different way, and then we have a mountaintop high, then you get what I'm saying. And then this is one that I think is hard for many of us. I would be on this list. Hurry, distraction, or performance-drivenness. We go through daily life with little awareness of Jesus' presence in all the big and small things. In other words, when we're doing our work, we make tents, but we're not making them with Jesus. What if Jesus is with us and we can be aware that he's with us in all of those moments? What if being with Jesus is what makes work more energized and good? You see what I'm saying? It's possible to have a deeper awareness of him in all of it. There's a tool that we've mentioned before that I can't break down completely right now, but you may be saying to yourself, but dude, I don't ever feel Jesus. I don't have those deep encounters like some people do, and that's okay. Many of us are wired differently. Many of us have different ways we connect with God, maybe in nature, maybe in music, or some of the traditional symbols of the faith or in quiet. Some of us with sort of saying, you know what, there's something wrong in the world and I'm going to put my energy to making things right, helping people just in general as a caregiver, maybe in awe of God as you continue to just contemplate how big he is, or maybe as you reflect and quietly just pray in contemplation, and being intellectual. All these things are good. They're not bad. It's when we take one sort of angle on Jesus and just settle for that we kind of limit what could be. But if you need a place to start, I encourage you to consider, like, maybe one of those is really natural for you. Lean into it, but then say, where's an area that's harder for me? And maybe lean into that too and see what happens. Here's what I hope, though. I hope that all of us can just simply assess what life with God has been like in the last 3 months. Where have you noticed Jesus? How has his love and light been present to you? What is he inviting you to do? Who is he becoming, or who are you becoming because of him? And who is he inviting you to become? This journey isn't easy, but I truly believe there's nothing better than being with him. And so what I want to do, I want to close our time and just pray that we would take that next step, whatever it might be. So would you stand with me? And the band's going to come up and let's pray. And if you feel open to it, just maybe even open your hands to Jesus. God, I realize that we all encounter you differently. But I know that whatever it looks like to be with you, with our unique personalities, our experiences, our struggles, our strengths, whatever that looks like, I just pray that you would help us go all in on that. Would you open us up to the reality that being with you in the mundane, regular, day-to-day grind is the greatest opportunity for us to become more and more formed after you, and for the people in our lives to experience more grace, more love, more of you through us. So Jesus, as we worship and we move towards your table, would you be opening us up to whatever that next step, that next place, that next normal everyday life reordering might be for us. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.